Good morning, podcasters. Today is Tuesday, May the 12th, 2026, and today we're talking publicity and reputation with publicists. I'm going to start that over. Hold on. I practiced this 10 times this morning and flubbed every time, so I'm not surprised. Here we go. Good morning, podcasters. Today is Tuesday, May the 12th, 2026, and today we're talking publicity and reputation with publicist Cyndee Harrison and why podcasters need a plan before their growing visibility brings public exposure, responsibility, and new challenges. So if you're listening live on Clubhouse, hit the share button, top right-hand side of the screen, and share it however Clubhouse lets you. And if you're catching us via podcast, YouTube, LinkedIn, etc., please share this with a fellow podcaster. And now give us about 30 seconds, and we'll get things rolling. Thanks for being here. The Podcasting Morning Chat is powered by Ironic Media, helping podcasters launch, polish, and grow great shows. And by Content Creators Accountant, helping creators build real business behind their content. Good morning again, Podcasting Morning Show. Thank you for being here. I am your host, Marc Ronick, and currently on stage with me, we have Ralph Estep, Dr. Fay, Sid Meadows, Alex Baelish, BC Babbles, and we also have our guest here, Cyndee Harrison, who we will get to momentarily. So yes, like I said, joining us today, Cyndee Harrison, and she is going to help us dig into this whole concept of publicity and how to handle that. So we'll dig into that in just a second. First, I want to dig into some housekeeping items for you. First, Empowered Podcasting Live, our live stream every other Wednesday, returns tomorrow, Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. That's Wednesday the 13th, with one of our event's creator partners and somebody I think may be familiar to many of you. Sid Meadows is joining us. We'll dig into Sid's success monetizing his podcast in 2026, which is some of what he'll share at the conference as well as a speaker, his experiences in podcasting, and of course his experience at Empowered Podcasting. So join us. All you got to do is go to podcastingmorningshow.com/EPC live and get all the info there. And that just reminded me, I think I need to update that page for tomorrow's show. So I will make sure to do that first thing after this show. So with that, now Cyndee, we got Cyndee here today because Ralph actually just hired her recently as his own publicist. So I think the best way to do this is to go hand it to Ralph to introduce our guest, and then we'll get things going. Go ahead, Ralph. Good morning.
Well, good morning, Mark. Good morning, Cyndee. And today joining us is Cyndee Harrison. Cyndee is a publicist who works with individuals and brands on publicity, reputation, messaging, and public exposure. We're going to talk about what podcasters should know before they step further into the spotlight. Now, today's conversation is especially important for podcast hosts, for creators, business owners, and anyone using media to grow their voice. We're going to talk about how publicity works, what can go wrong, how to prepare, and why having the right support matters. So that's exactly so. Cyndee, so glad that you could be here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited for the conversation.
And what a great guest. Like, if you're not watching the video right now, she's got her microphone. Like, she knows how to be a good podcast guest. We have no audio problems. The video looks great. This is a great example of a good guest right out of the gate.
Oh, wow. Well, it's early yet. It's early.
Great to be here. So, Ralph, do you want to kick things off with your first question?
Sure, absolutely. And Mark, you and I had talked a little bit before the show. We talked about why I hired Cyndee, and I think we can start there.
Yeah, let's do
So
it.
the reason that I hired Cyndee is my shows are starting to grow, my influence is starting to grow, and I said, I need to take it to the next level. And I met Cyndee through the Podcast Professionals Association, and I had just reached out to her and I said, Cyndee, is this something you do? Is this something you can help someone grow their influence, get me in front of new audience? And she said, oh yeah, Ralph. She said, that's exactly what I do. So we struck up a conversation and we become fast friends, I would say. We bounced a lot of ideas off each other. She just got finished her team building, I guess you call it a press kit, and super impressive press kit. She makes me look better than I could ever have been. So I'm super excited about having her help me to really take it to the next level. I've shared with her sort of my hopes and dreams of what I want to accomplish in podcasting in the greater, sphere of influence. So that's really the reason that I hired Cyndee. But Cyndee, I want to jump into our first question because a lot of people don't know what a publicist does. Can you explain your role, the types of clients and situations you typically help people with?
Sure. Well, and thank you again for I am really excited, Ralph. You're such a great use case because there are so many business owners, creators, and leaders who work so hard to build a brand and to build, in the case of podcast hosts, to build an audience. And so a publicist job essentially is to help those people to tell that story in the marketplace, whatever that marketplace may be. And so for podcast hosts specifically, it's always interesting to see what a bank, if you will, of content is available. But so many times that bank of content, those videos, those show notes, those blog posts tend to live within four walls. And at one time, that wasn't such a problem because the audience would come and step into those four walls with that podcast host and enjoy that content. And then business could transact, or, it just sort of played out really naturally. Now we live in a world where, of course, I am biased, but I think that anyone who is building a brand reputation should engage with a publicist. Naturally, I would. But a publicist is that connective tissue that can help anyone who is building a brand reputation to connect with audiences outside their own four walls, whether that's the four walls of their podcast show, the four walls of their business, even the four walls of like an influencer. We all build these silos around ourselves unintentionally. So a publicist can help you stretch out of that and is typically known for connecting you with mainstream media. So, and I use that word very, very carefully. And I would love to hear how you guys agree or disagree with this. I feel like podcasting is now mainstream. And so I am open to calling mainstream media something else. But when I am using that word, I am thinking of what we have traditionally called mainstream media, like newspapers, magazines, places and media that have broader and different audiences who are interested in what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that a lot of us, or a lot of people, are now accepting podcasting more as mainstream media. I don't think it's quite there, just in the sense of the perspective of the public eye. I don't know that everybody yet considers it mainstream media, but for all intents and purposes, I do think it is now these days. A lot of people referring to that as their source for information, et cetera. So we'll see. But I think before we know it, everybody's going to just lump that in with the rest of the media out there.
I agree.
Yeah.
When I first my first foray into podcasting, I was an internal publicist for someone who had a really big audience. And CBS actually came to him and said, we're dipping a toe. This was in the Play.it days. Does anyone remember Play.it?
I don't.
At the time, they were calling it syndicated, which I think would now be essentially a network. Anyway, I'm just interested to see if anyone remembers that. But it was a CBS product, and we were we were so fortunate because we would show up at the local radio station. They would provide all of the infrastructure. We just lined up guests, spoke to them. It was a great show. And what they kept saying repeatedly was, we have to, in order to find that podcast audience, we've got to get you on other podcasts, and we have to figure out. And it was so funny because at that time, the podcast listening audience, the population that was engaging with podcasts was such a specific and tiny slice of everyone. And it's been really nice in the past few years. That was in 2015. And it's been really nice to kind of re-enter podcasting and go, oh, these were the days that folks in the business were looking forward to. Back when I was first trying to crack the code on how do we grow this thing? How do we engage with sponsors? How do we get advertisers? Like, how is this? So it's been really an interesting time. It's like I've time hopped into now, and it
Yeah,
is
I
mainstream.
hear you.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, when you hear the word, well, I should say when people hear the word publicity, they often think it only means press or attention, right? How would you define publicity in a more complete way?
So I tend to put it all in the bucket of reputation, because reputation, if you think about the good old days, reputation used to be a work product, right? So I'm from a small town in East Tennessee, and I grew up knowing and believing that if you do the work, you earn the reputation, and the rest will take care of itself. And that applied to pretty much everything. And nowadays, like if you do a Google search for reputation management, which is what I really call what I do, what is it talking about? It's all talking about AI, online visibility, the ability to be found as the subject matter expert that you are. And so I think that that is what I think of as publicity, is your ability to be found for your subject matter expertise.
Mm. Awesome. Anyone else have another question along these lines? We have plenty of questions for her, but I just want to make sure that everyone else can pop in if they'd like. All right. Well, Ralph, do you want to take the next one?
Absolutely. Let me get to my notes here. And so the next question is from podcast is a powerful platform now. And from your perspective, why should podcasters think about publicity different than someone with a traditional business? And actually, this goes along the lines of what you and I've had many conversations about now. And that is, how do we, one of the things you said to me when you were building my press kit is like, well, we're not going to be starved for material for you, but how do we bridge that? How should podcasters, that's the audience we're talking to today. How should podcasters think about publicity differently than someone with a traditional business? I know you've worked with traditional businesses. We talked a little bit about that before the show. You actually work with some pawn businesses that they actually had a reality TV show, which is really cool. But, how do you bridge that gap between the podcast and the traditional business, Cyndee?
So that's a great question. I think it sort of goes back to what I alluded to a little earlier, how podcasters put so much into building their show, right? They pour everything into growing and sort of feeding and watering that audience. And now there are so many golden nuggets that tend to be buried within that podcast ecosystem. So what I think my job as a publicist, specifically for podcasters, is to help them take that and mine that gold and share it with journalists and others who are looking for that content. All of us are old enough to remember the days when reporters, television news was the way we got our information every single day. Folks read the newspapers to start their day, and then we've all seen that decline of that. That's what I call more traditional news, and we've seen a decline of it. But now we're seeing, like in real time, AI tools are looking for verifiable sources. So media is scrambling to make this huge comeback. And as a result, there are journalists who have been starved. They've been starved of budget. They've been starved of all the luxuries of their timeline. They're hungry to connect with people who can lend expertise and lend a unique kind of AI, which is authentic insight to the stories that they are now charged with producing. So that's the media side of it. And the benefit to the podcaster is that you are being seen by a different audience. It's like a totally different look for you.
Mm.
And what's really nice is um, that findability, that look that is coming from the perspective of media is really beneficial for an entirely different audience. And I want to talk a little bit about what podcasters' goals are. And I don't know if any of your audience ever, states this as a goal, but nowadays there are monetization opportunities, whether that's a brand partnership or an advertising partnership. And the reality is that a lot of those network executives or sponsors or brand partners, they may never have the time to take a deep dive into all that gold that's laying there in your many, many podcast episodes. So you need to make sure that you are serving them up little golden nuggets in the highly visible media hits. And so if you can get in front of, and if a publicist like me, or you can do it yourself, if you can find a way to connect with a journalist and land some of that earned media, it's really, really an important way to make sure that you're tapping into that second audience, that non-listening audience that has a lot of influence over your show's success.
And that's kind of what you're doing for me, right? I mean, that's the whole point. I hope I don't offend anybody when I say you said part of your job is kissing frogs. And I thought that was a really interesting way to put it, but it is the truth, right?
It's 100% kissing frogs. It's much like taxes. I could do my own taxes. I could paint my own car. There's a lot of things I could do myself. And so we live in a world where darn near anything is available to us. And so I uh, I do believe that the work of a professional publicist is helpful when you reach a certain level of, and Ralph, I'm not pandering to you, but I mean you have reached a certain level where you have built a bank of content and you've built an audience that it's time for you to take that step up. But not every podcast host has to start there. There are a lot of things that you can do to get that media attention entirely on your own.
Can you give us an example?
For sure. So there are tools. Have you heard of Heyro, Help a Reporter Out?
Yes.
That's one of my favorite tools for a number of reasons. That's one of many. There's Muck Rack and Quoted, and I'll think of others. I'll think of others, but there are all sorts of tools where journalists go to try to connect with people who can serve as a source. And so that's a great place to start. You can subscribe to Heyro. Heyro originally, they've changed the acronym now, but it originally stood for Help a Reporter Out, and it meant exactly that. So imagine the job of a journalist, and you have been assigned a story and you have fleshed it out. Now, if you're a journalist, you obviously can't just give your opinion on everything. It is your job to connect with people who are experts in the field and do your research. You've put it all together. And then your editor says, not enough sources. So what do? It's like, I'm at deadline, I'm freaking out. So someone very smartly invented this system for just putting the word out. And if you subscribe to lists like that, then you get insight and it will teach you how journalists operate. You'll see in real time the types of angles that they work on now in your field. So let's take Ralph as an example in the personal finance or creator economy. You can just start watching what are articles that are the angles that align with his expertise. And then you're very welcome to. Now, in those examples, those are situations where those are reporters that are under deadline. So that's when I say it's kissing frogs, because you have people like me who employ an entire team who do nothing else but watch these, just like you would watch like a stock ticker. They're watching these all the time for opportunities. That's not the only way. You can also just find, oh, there's a reporter who just wrote an article about my area of expertise. I'm going to give them a couple of days to finish this. And I'm going to just reach out and introduce myself and say, hey, noticed this article. I saw the finished piece. I really align with this perspective. And next time you need a subject matter expert, I'd love to collaborate with you.
Very cool. Thank you for the examples. I think that's really helpful for a lot of us, because I think there are plenty of people in our audience that may not be ready yet for a publicist, but they're intrigued by this conversation. So yeah, the more we can provide, I think the better. But DR, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I have a question. As soon as you mentioned Haro, I perked up because I have access to Haro through Press. I forgot the platform that I belong to. I just don't know how to use Haro. I think I need like a YouTube video tutorial or something on how to use it.
Well, and I am not in it every day. My team spends a lot more time in it. So just so I'm certain that someone has invented a YouTube tutorial. The basic premise, though, is that they want you to submit responses, typically in very specific answers to questions. And so most of the journalists that we work with are very, very deliberate. They are trying to figure out, how does AI play into all of this? And so I would encourage you to separate yourself. If you are responding to a Haro inquiry, you say it Haro. What do I say?
I say Haro, but it might be Haro.
I have an accent, so
I'm in Nashville, so I know, girl. I know.
I grew up down south. I have lived in the Midwest 25 years, so people never know. Like anything I say, I'm like, I don't know. I'm a mutt with my accent. And so, when I've done it, I think the biggest benefit is, and I'm curious, and I won't put you on the spot, but I'm curious, how frequently do you check it?
I don't, because I don't know how to use it. And every time I go into it, I'm reminded I really need help on this.
And it's like every darn thing. Every time I learn a new system, I'm like, dang it, they either move or
update it to where it's no longer applicable. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm the same. And I'm sure that those tutorials, there's probably some influencer out there who will explain the step by step. But I think it's the best way to learn it is by doing it every single day. And that's the thing. That's why I call it kissing frogs, is there's really no magic to what we do. It's like a matchmaker. There's no great magic to any of this. It's just making sure that we're ready to be responsive. And here, I will tell you this secret sauce. We don't waste their time. So last week, I just did a presentation from stage with it was such an honor, with two journalists, one of whom has won 30 Emmy Awards. I'm like, what the heck? And this guy was an investigative journalist. And the other presenter, Steve Kelso, it was Brad Edwards and Steve Kelso. And Steve used to manage the newsroom. And he was there to lend perspective into what actually makes its way to a reporter from the assignment desk. And I think that is the secret. What he shared would be the secret sauce that I would share with you, is to avoid what we call spray and pray. And so many times when you've worked so hard on something and you've built, whether it's a podcast or the local bakery, you've just worked so hard on this thing. And this story feels so real and so newsworthy to you that you want to tell every reporter. And so, here you go, you're Googling, what's Anderson Cooper's email, and you're just really trying to tell that story. I think that the secret sauce is to be really, really deliberate and not, like I say, not overreach and to really preserve that inquiry to times where you really have something that is newsworthy. Now, the question is, what is newsworthy? And that, believe it or not, it is more subjective than it sounds. But newsworthy. Well, let me ask you guys, what do you think the word newsworthy?
Wow. I mean, I would say it's anything that is in the mass public interest. Would that be a fair way to put it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's exactly it, is
Okay.
that it's broad. We live in a world where everything is based on audience numbers. So
But could you create something and make it newsworthy?
Absolutely. So I'll give you a good example. So Brad told a story from the stage of a Lebanese restaurant. And this was a beautiful immigrant story. It was a beautiful living the American dream story. But it was a local restaurant on a corner in Chicago. And there was just nothing that was newsworthy. And then there was a violence an eruption in Beirut. Well, this restaurant owner was from Beirut. And so he connected the local news station that was looking for local relevance stories to the fact that there was this, story from very, very far away. And they came to the restaurant. They asked for his perspective. He still had family over there. And so I don't know if it's so much about creating the news, although we do hear a lot of that, of people create news every single day, typically with their phone in their face.
Mhm.
But yes, so that's all about crafting an angle. Yeah, that's a great question.
All right, cool. Well, then my next question, when we think about a podcast, it's something that gives us a really public voice,
Mhm.
right? So what kind of opportunities does that create? And I also want to find out, what are some of the risks that come with that visibility?
So that's a great question. I want to make sure that we get to both of them. So first, I think one of the missed opportunities I see so many podcast hosts maybe skip is they invest so much into the growth of their show that they sort of neglect their personal brand. Do you guys ever see that, where everything is about the show? And what's happening, again, going back to when there is a journalist or a network exec or a future brand partner, they're probably Googling your name. And so I think sometimes there are other podcast hosts that are less worthy who are getting those opportunities just because they are more findable. So that would be one missed opportunity that I would see with podcast hosts. And then you had a great second question, and I knew I'd
The
forget it.
risks.
Oh. So the thing, we were talking so much about grow your visibility, and then no one ever helps us to manage the vulnerability, right?
Mm.
So when you connect with media and you get placed and you are growing this, then there are vulnerabilities. And I think that it's important to always anticipate them. One of the and I would love to hear, you guys probably have a ton of stories, but one of the biggest vulnerabilities I see with podcast shows are the vulnerabilities that come along with guests. And I'm curious if you guys have any stories of guests who particularly with a live show, they come on your show and they maybe unintentionally, perhaps intentionally, they say something that's really controversial that ends up being a soundbite that goes viral. I think that's a very real risk in your space. Have any of you ever heard of that sort of thing happening?
BC, I see your hand is up. Do you have an example?
So I shared this story a little while ago on this show, but I actually a few years ago got myself in quite a bit of trouble. And actually lost a job because I was not careful as a host in the kind of conversation I was facilitating with a couple of coworkers. I was in a brand new space, a lot of similar aged entrepreneurial people that I worked with. And so I found a great kind of source of guests who could talk about growing in a space that shifts and how to adjust to new workflows in the office and whatnot. But there was a particular toxic underground to the workspace, and I had two people on who were pretty hip deep in that element of the atmosphere. And while typically I had known better to curve away from that, make sure the conversation was productive and whatnot, I let it go a different direction, and I did the dumber thing, which was produce it and put it out there. And the morning it went out, I got a call from my trainer from the from the job and said, "Hey, I don't know if you made the best move here. You might want to bring this down a little when you get to the office," which I did. Spent my entire morning taking it down every place that I found it. And that's the day that I learned about the dangers of secondary distributors for podcasts. But I ended up losing my job because of it, because I allowed the conversation to get too toxic. I was not smart in how I facilitated it. I did not curb it the right way. And so, yeah, that was a big learning moment for me as a podcaster, which is why I'm much more methodical about pre-interviews, planning ahead. And if and when I see a conversation go a place I don't want it to go, I curb it immediately or put a pause on it, redirect, and make sure the conversation ultimately is productive and is actually providing something to the public as opposed to really spicy gossip content.
Wow. I'm sorry that happened to you.
Hey, I needed to learn that. I take that fully now as like, you know what? I fully owned it. I was like, you know what? I gave them the mic. Don't fire them. They still fired them. All three of us got
But you
booted
know
for
what?
it.
It really speaks to the knowledge of the host, because there are some things that you wouldn't mind it going in a different direction. And you have to make that split second decision as to, is this going to be detrimental to my job, or is this just going to be like a really big thing that might be great for, to get the name of the business out there. So it's really a split second thing that you have to, as a host, be able to manipulate.
Oh, and boy howdy, did those numbers start rising quickly. Because once people within the in the workspace learned who was on the episode, everyone started clocking into the episode really quick. That one got the highest numbers, I think, in the history of my show because of who was on it and what they presumed we were likely talking about. So lesson learned. That was like back in 2022, but I have definitely grown pretty well since then.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. And that's the thing. In fact, the first the way I learned about crisis communications was, as Ralph sort of alluded to, I had a job that was in a high risk industry, and I was working for people who were at the height of visibility. And so whenever anyone in that field had a problem, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I'll just call Cyndee. She knows what's going on." And so I would always think, "Ugh, if I had only talked to you before, if I could turn back time," because we learn so many lessons the hard way. So the good news for you is that you experienced what I always say whenever I talk to someone who is in the middle of a crisis, which is everything is temporary. So that was temporary, but at that moment, I want to talk more. Now I feel like I'm digging deep into your psyche, but I just want to hear it from you instead of me telling you. But tell me about, how did that feel for you? Like, were you emotional? Like,
I felt very disappointed in myself because this had been, I mean, the show's my thought baby. This is my creative passion. And I had done so well up to that moment to bring in people from the space that really added to the conversation in a way that I always wanted the conversation to provide. And so when I realized how unexpectedly I slipped up in such a way that I hadn't before.
Yeah.
And we're not just talking about, of course, we're not just talking about me having a full-blown conversation for an hour and not hitting record. This is me hosting a very toxic conversation. I'm just like, wow, I this sucks in the moment as I am like pleading to the hiring managers, like, I understand what I did. This is
Yeah.
my fault. You know, give me all the onus and whatnot. I think emotionally, I was just surprised to
Yeah.
bring it simply worded is just surprised in myself, surprised in my capacity to falter in that way as a host and as a producer, and to let that kind of thing go out there into the ether, as I call it a lot of times, the digital ether, and let it get any kind of attention whatsoever. So
Yeah.
for me, it's like, you know, I don't often learn the lesson the easy way. I had to learn it the hard way, and this time was the hard way. So just
Well,
take
none
those
of us do.
guys,
Right.
you know?
And so you're not alone in that. So let's use
Right.
your example. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
That's a very vulnerable moment. And let me tell you something. It is so common in those moments. We get so emotional and we feel all the things that you're feeling. We feel disappointed in ourselves. We feel betrayed. We feel like we betrayed ourselves. We feel stupid. And then when those outside forces, either it's in your case, you lost a job, in a podcast host's case, it could be we lost a partnership, we lost a collaboration, we lost an advertiser. So I think I'm really glad that you articulated those because that's really consistent with anyone who experiences this. So that's why the very, very first thing that I always teach people is to anticipate. And it sounds so simple. You'd be shocked how many people just fail to anticipate whatever their endeavor is, whether it is a business or they're building influence. Influencers tend to be so focused on audience growth. And I'm talking about like specifically social media influencers who
Mhm.
I'm hearing from an increasing number of, and some podcasters also consider themselves influencers. You would be shocked at how little anticipatory they just really fail to do that anticipatory work beforehand and just ask the question, how could this go wrong? How could this land wrong with the audience I have and the audience I am trying to build? And so I think just spending a little time um, fleshing that out beforehand, you were having to do it in real time. And none of us are as good on our feet, no matter how much we believe ourselves to be. We're never as fast on our feet as we are with a little bit of forethought. And so that's why I always recommend the just anticipate. And that includes for you particularly, you were, am I right? You had a podcast that you weren't like the buck didn't stop there. It was on behalf of a brand that you didn't necessarily own, right? Sounds like it was part of your job.
No, it was my show.
Oh,
So I had a
oh,
show that had started way before the job, but when I found myself amongst all these similarly minded folks, I thought, ooh, a nice pool of guests.
got it.
And so
Okay.
that's what happened.
Okay, I understand. Oh, well, then then that leads me to that that whole thing I was talking about before of the second audience. So I am willing to guess, and we will never know, but or perhaps they told you, but so many people have influence over, in this case, your job, your life, quite literally, who will never take the deep dive and hear your full show in all context, right? So maybe if they had gone back and listened to all the prior episodes, they would get a feel for and they would understand, like, oh, okay, I get it. This is sort of how, if we just trust, we're going to follow BC down this path, and these are the types of conversations that he has. But they never did. They judged your entire persona based on sound
On the
bites.
one show.
Yeah, yeah. So anticipating that and recognizing that this is the life of the podcaster. You can't like I say, a tax accountant has to sit back and go, this I can't be afraid of the IRS. This is the work I do. And so a podcaster, you have to anticipate that sort of thing going sideways. Now, what would you have done differently when it comes to, as we said, we're talking about the topic of guests and the vulnerability that guests bring alongside them. If you had it to do over again, would you have hit publish, or would you retool? What would you do if you could go back in time?
Basically, I would have held off and reflected on the episode. Do I have anything here that caters to what I'm supposed to be using this platform for? In
Mm,
that case, I would have said, no, hey guys, can we come back at some point, re-record, redirect the conversation? This thing cannot go out as it is.
yeah, yeah. And I've seen that happen. And larger media shows will do that quite frequently. A lot of things end up on, the proverbial cutting room floor that we never end up seeing for exactly that reason. And it's because what they do, they anticipate. They also have they not always, because we see a lot of missteps in the media too, but they have an idea of the values and the purpose of their show. And so when things go a little sideways, they're able to ask themselves, okay, does this align with what I'm building? And if not, then we either need to redirect, which it sounds like that's what you would have done if you had a chance to do it over again. They'll either redirect, they'll cut it all together, they make a decision on the fly. And so, sticking with that whole anticipate theme, it's important that when you are setting up your show and you're deciding on the focus of your show, and you are deciding on, will your show include guests? If so, is it live? And you're walking through all this decision making of what this show is going to be. You really should anticipate and consider all of those things. If you talk about controversial topics, there's only one mouth that you can control. So maybe you reconsider how you invite guests into the space. But that's a great. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time on.
That's okay. I think real life examples are important here for this conversation. So I think that works well. And I know that Sid has a question for you as well. Go ahead, Sid.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Mark. So the situation that BC described, though to the extreme, is kind of the fear that I get when reaching out to podcast guests, because my show is basically an interview show, and I hear all the time, "Oh, I can't do that. My boss is going to get mad," or "What if I say something wrong?" So it's a real thing that I think guests go through on a regular basis, and as hosts, I think especially if they are, have a full-time job, it's something we have to be very cognizant of how we approach that and how we handle it. But my question is really more about outreach. So I probably get 5 to 10 emails a day from Publicist pitching someone on my show.
You can't see that, but
And
Cyndee is giggling right now.
oh yeah, and
Oh,
I
give it
publish a
all back.
show about
I know.
like I published a show about AI, and goodness gracious, my email fills up with Publicists, and the problem is, out of all these, I get less than 0.005% of them actually will fit my show, because my show is very niche, in a very niche community. And I'm not really sure. I mean, I just ignore them, honestly, is what I do with them. And so I get a few occasionally. I probably have had 2 people on my show that actually came from a publicist, and those people were actually in my industry, are related to it, so I could have them on board. But it's extremely frustrating, and I'm not sure as a podcaster what I could do differently to help these people understand that, hey, this is not my show. This guest is not for my show.
Deep sigh. I don't know how to make it stop. They're giving us all a bad name.
Mhm.
It is a really common problem. And at least, Sid, you have a show that does have guests. You'd be shocked, or maybe you wouldn't be shocked at all, at how frequently I hear from podcasters who never have guests. And they are alone on the mic, and they get pitched every single day to bring a guest onto a show. It's a real problem, and I wish I wish I had the solution. I don't. All I can do is, as I said earlier, it's really important that we not replicate that and kind of stop the madness. When you engage with a professional publicist, that's the very last thing they want to do. Because if you think about it, and if there are any publicists out there, I wish they would hear me say this. I've been at this game a long, long time, and here's the truth. When that podcaster receives that email, they are not only going to kind of mentally cross you off of their list, but that impacts every client that you have. And so that impacts everyone that you work with. And so it goes back to Ralph. I do say, and I have a little statue of a frog prince, because a publicist's job is to know which frogs to kiss so that one will eventually turn into, it's a thankless job to reach out and know that you have a great subject matter expert that really could contribute to the quality programming of, in this case, your show about AI. So it's disappointing to hear that. I wish I had I really wish I had the solution. What I do in those situations is I just have like a canned response of trying to live into like a be the change moment, like letting them know, stop this. This is not a solid practice for our industry.
The best is when I get emails asking me how I want to grow my podcast. Hey, do you want to grow your podcast? I got all the solutions. It's like, hey, I help people do that too, buddy. They just don't pay any attention. And yeah, it's usually AI that's doing it. Yeah, Ralph, take it away.
Cyndee, I wanted to pivot here a little bit, and I want to get to some practicality. So what should podcast hosts have in place before they start seeking more exposure? Because a lot of people say, well, I want to go get more exposure. But Cyndee, what are the things that you need to have lined up before you do that? Because I think it's real easy to say, well, yeah, I'm going to go out there and get that viral moment. I'm going to do this, and this to broaden this exposure. But there's some things you got to have in place, correct, before you go and make that reach.
You're right. So that's a great pivot. Look at you. You should have a show or two.
I think I might know what I'm doing here, maybe. I'm not sure.
So that's a great question. And I think it's a really important takeaway for any podcaster that's listening. So it's really important that you anticipate. That's my favorite word of the day, that you anticipate that when you reach out to media, they have a responsibility to vet you. And so you can very easily do exactly what they're going to do. You can anticipate that they are going to search for you, and they're going, hear me very well, they're going to typically search for you by your name, your human name, not necessarily your show name. So it's really important that you have a personal brand that is findable. We spent, how many years did we all invest in learning all the tricks of the trade of SEO, search engine optimization? Because it used to be that whatever we stuck on our website, the interwebs would just take our word for it. And it's like, oh, we say that we are an expert in these keywords. And so the interwebs were like, okay, here's your expert in these keywords, like whatever. Now, of course, we know the algorithms are highly sophisticated. And so search is all, and Sid is an expert in these things. He's probably forgotten more than I'll ever know about AI. But these AI tools are now generating answers based on 360 degrees of visibility. And so to your question, Ralph, what we need to do is make sure that we have a vettable and verifiable personal brand. So that would include the media kit that we talked about earlier. And a media kit sounds old-timey. Guess what? It is old-timey.
We talk about it all the time, Cyndee. It's not in these circles. No, we say it's not old-timey at all. We encourage it to our community.
You have to make it easy for them because, again, realize it is not their job to promote and protect your show. That's your job. So make it easy for them. So make yourself or have someone make for you a media kit and keep it updated. You need to make sure that your media hits, your expertise is extremely digestible for them. They need to be able to put their finger on it fast. So a media kit can be, I mean, you could start with a simple body of an email with links to your snippets of your own show, your appearances on other shows, whatever you've got to do to make yourself easy to vet, because they are certainly not going to put you in front of their editors if their editor isn't able to find any verification that you are who you say you are. You are the expert that you presume to be. So that's what it boils down to. You have to be vettable and verifiable. A really fast track way to do that is LinkedIn posts. LinkedIn is being, really, really, Reddit is also really, really searchable. It is responding well to AI tools. And again, I get a little bit self-conscious when I talk too much about AI tools because I'm like, I'm learning these as I go too. But the fact of the matter is that you have to be easily found in well beyond the four walls of your show or even your website. So you have to make sure that you are growing your personal brand.
So then what are some of the early warning signs that a podcaster might need when they might need reputation or publicity support?
So that's a great question. It's fairly nuanced. I'll tell you when is the wrong time. The
Okay.
wrong time is when you already are battling the alligators, when you have already stepped into the swamp. Right, BC? Like when you're already there, it's very, very difficult for a publicist. Now, what a publicist can do in those moments, and I've actually built a lot of my career doing this, is a publicist can help you mitigate damage when you are in that moment. But what I am dedicated is to helping you avoid them, because the best PR crisis is the one that never happens. So if a good publicist does their job, then it looks like as on the crisis end of the scorecard, nothing much happens, and it doesn't mean that things don't go sideways. Things are going to go sideways. You are going to get haters. You can't grow without the haters, and you are going to get imitators, and you are going to get detractors. Things are going to go wrong. You're going to get negative feedback. Sometimes the robots are giving you the negative feedback. If you're growing a show, then things are going to go sideways. All you are able to control is how you respond to it. And the best way to respond to it is to anticipate what could go wrong. If you have a show about AI, for example, like the caller did a moment ago, you should probably be anticipating, what would the haters say about you? What would haters say about you if you had a show about AI? I can't answer that off the top of my head, but you can, because you know your business. If you have a show that's about gardening, what would a hater say about you? What would a detractor say about your show? Spend some time anticipating that. And then the next step is to fortify your brand position. So you see big brands. I mean, think of any big major podcaster, whether it's Mel Robbins or who are some of the big names that people throw out all the time. These big podcasters, do you think they never mess up? Do you think they never have a
Right.
guest that goes sideways? The only difference between them and you is they have a really fortified, strong brand position. And they have that position as a person, their personal brand, and as a show.
Cyndee, I want to go into a little deeper here as we start to wrap up, because this is the very conversation you and I had, because I live in two very different worlds. As you know, I have a very big faith-based podcast, and at the same time, I'm a financial professional. And you and I had a long discussion about what the order, what the sequence is in this. And one of the things that I worry about sometimes, I'm also an emotional person. And I think it's real easy for a podcaster to get themselves in a strong emotional response. So what is the best strategy to avoid doing that when you feel attacked or you feel criticized or you feel misunderstood? publicly, because this happens to me all the time. Like I have a huge, what do you call it, YouTube presence. And I put a lot of content out there, and people say some of the most rotten, disgusting, nasty things that you can imagine. And when I first started this, even my wife would say to me, she goes, "Why do you do that? Like people they hate on you constantly." And I said, "But that's not my audience." So how do you train the person? I'll put myself in under the looking glass here. How do you train me to not respond emotionally when I'm being attacked in a way that makes me want to just put the fist up like I'm on the, the bully on the playground afterwards?
Well, it does feel like a bully, and that's a great analogy. So I am a former school teacher, and I can remember my first career was teaching elementary school children, and I can remember telling them, "You will never be better at bullying than the bully, because the bully is practicing all day long. All you can do is just avoid being in their crosshairs." And so that analogy somewhat translates to podcasting, because you just need to remind yourself you're never going to out troll the trolls. And so having that knowledge and going into that does help tamp those emotions a little bit. Also, it's really important to maintain focus. If you have launched a show, and hear me well, if you have launched a show, then you are doing it, and you are doing it a heck of a lot better than any of the trolls who are in your feed. Like what I always want to say to a troll is, "Yeah, well, what have you got? Show me what you're doing that's better. I'm coachable. So what have you got?" So I think it's really important. But my best advice for anyone who's in the creative space is tap into a network who can be your sounding board. So for you, Ralph, that's me. I'm your publicist now, and I'm honored to do so. And we'll navigate those things together, but not every podcast is ready for a publicist. And so make sure that you have someone who understands what you're doing. They understand the values, as we talked about earlier, BC, like what's the purpose of this show? What are the values of this show? And what's the audience that we're aiming for? They understand and align with that so that you don't feel alone, because building something, whether it is a podcast show, a brand, it is a lonely endeavor. And so I think those emotions, that means you're passionate about your show. And so without them, you'd be pretty lousy at it. I think your emotional connection to this audience is probably a big reason behind your success in the space. So you're not going to be able to check that at the door, but it's like the famous words of Dr. Seuss: "Those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind." So focus on the audience you're aiming for. And then you can also, to kind of mitigate that, I always tell my clients to sort of gamify it instead of looking at, and I do this myself, instead of looking at that comment or whatever, because you do want to reply. The algorithms are telling us we got to be responsive. So if you can, gamify it and remind yourself that if you engage, you're not talking to this troll, you're talking to everyone who's going to come after. And so use that as an opportunity to, with you have a very broad audience in the faith-based space. And what you may be doing is demonstrating how a person of faith responds to controversy and conflict. So look at it as a challenge, like a branding challenge, and take that as an opportunity. And at the end of the day, take a walk. I always say, like, take a beat. We feel like we build so much and everything's got to be in real time. Like they just posted and I got to post back. No, you don't. There's no law about that. Just give yourself a minute, and everything always looks better in the span of time.
By the way, prshield.com, that's where you can learn more about Cyndee and what she does. And that's also in the show notes as well, in case you forget. So go check that out. Check out Cyndee, show her some support. And one more question for you, Cyndee, before we wrap up here. And this actually comes from the YouTube chat. And I'm guessing this is somebody who may know you, Rachel. Just because of an earlier question or an earlier comment she made, I'm guessing she knows you because I think she was saying hello to you. So with that, it's, what's the best part of being a publicist?
Oh, I love that. And I do know Rachel.
Okay.
Rachel is my partner
Oh,
and
cool.
happens to be my daughter, but she
Ah.
is a very well qualified publicist on her own right. The very best part of being a publicist is seeing people be seen. It is so nice to be able to be brought into someone else's world and see their passion about something that I may have never even considered. I've talked to people who've dedicated their lives to endeavors that I had never previously heard of. And to watch that passion convert into visibility and growth and see that this storytelling conveys into them being able to achieve their dreams, I'll take it all day long.
Yeah.
It's
And
I'm very privileged.
And Cyndee, I know I mentioned your website, but is there anywhere else, anything else going on that you'd like our audience to know about?
Yes, yes, yes. So I'm starting a school community. I talked about it a little bit beforehand, and I'm nervous about it. I've had school for a really long time, and I just don't pull the trigger on it. I don't tell anyone about it. And guess what? If you don't tell anybody about it, they don't just accidentally show up. So I'm building it in real time. It's pretty empty now. I would love for your audience to come and build it with me, and we will create that community and that will be a safe space where you can go and say, oh my gosh, look at what this troll just said to me. How should I proceed from here? And you'll be surrounded by a community that gets it. We're like-minded.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, we will check that out, and we can check that out at the actual website, prshield.com, or is there some?
right.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Cyndee, thank you so much. I am so glad you and Ralph connected and that you were able to come here and join us this morning. Great conversation, and we'd love to have you come back sometime.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this. Only one cup of coffee. I'm so
Yeah, well, the good news is that we could have asked you a couple of weeks ago, and that would have meant that you'd have to join us an hour earlier then, because we made our time later just so we could get more guests like you. So thank you for being one of the first to do that.
Yeah, well, on behalf of all the lazy bones like me, thank you.
You are welcome. And we are back tomorrow, 8 a.m. Eastern time. We are doing all the news and headlines around the world of podcasting. We will share our thoughts and opinions on those stories. So come join us, be in the know. As a podcaster, I think it's important for us to know what's going on in this crazy world of podcasting. So come join us then, and you can find us at podcastingmorningshow.com/join us, and you can choose whether or not you want to watch, listen live, or catch us as a podcast on your favorite podcast platform. So until tomorrow, make it a great day, everybody.